Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the death of 3 Rollin 60 Crips that were shot and killed in a shootout at the Fox Hill Mall back in the 2000s. Now, the Fox Hill Mall was once one of the notorious spots for gang violence ever since opening in 1975. Now, the Fox Hill Mall is located in Culver City between Sepulveda Boulevard and Slauson Avenue. Now, one gang in particular back in the day was known for claiming Fox Hill Mall, and that was the Rollin 60s. Now, according to OG Big U, they would target rival gang members the moment that they touched down in that area.
We probably had more incidents in Culver City dealing with a gang than anybody else. We was claiming the mall, man, all the way from us being AGs. We used to stand on Crips Shot K and Slauson and catch enemies getting on the Slauson bus trying to get to the malls.
Now, another incident that took place in the early 90s was when the 6-0s ran into members of the neighborhood Pyrus and a confrontation happened.
That day we went to the mall, we got into it with the 60s. They followed us back to the hood. We was at Fast Gas. They came up dumping. Me and Ball, Dulo, Taco was gang of us because we banged crazy in the mall that day. They dumped on us.
Now, throughout the years, multiple incidents will continue to occur. Now, in the summer of 2000, one of the most violent incidents would take place at the Fox Hill Mall, and 3 people in total would lose their lives. Now, 2 Rollin 60 Crips, Ernest Dabbs, aka Baby Marco, and Lloyd Brewer, aka Boo Rock, both rented an apartment at the Fox Hills. Now, on July 25th at around 6 p.m., the Rollin 60 Crips, including Baby Marco, Boo Rock, Baby Wack, and other members of the 60s, were at the mall kicking it at the food court. Now, a short while later, members of the Bloods will be seen walking in. Now, it's said it's either between the neighborhood Pyrus or the Inglewood families, but the 60s will see them and both gangs will start throwing up their hood at each other. Now, eventually the 60s and the Bloods will continue arguing as they headed outside to the parking lot roof area. Now, at that same time, 2 plain Culver City officers were sitting in the food court, and they would hear the disturbance and eventually make their way towards the roof area. Now, once outside, the argument between the Bloods and the 60s will continue, and eventually a fight would ensue. And only moments later, the sounds of gunfire could be heard ringing out through the mall. Both the 60s and the Bloods were both shooting at each other. Boo Rock, Marco, and Wack were all letting off shots and return fire at the Bloods. Now, only moments later, the 2 plainclothes officers will come running out from the food court onto the roof area, telling everybody to freeze and to drop their weapons. But in the midst of the chaos, both the 60s and the Bloods will continue to shoot, and this will lead to both officers opening fire at both 60 members and the Bloods. Now, Boo Rock will be hit multiple times with gunfire and will collapse onto the pavement. Now, Baby Wack of the 60s would also be hit with gunfire and will collapse on the ground. Now, Baby Marco will make his way down of the parking lot area. A total of 25 shots were let off in this massive shootout. And at this point, the mall was in pure chaos, with families and children all running for their lives while hearing this gunfire take place on the roof. But once all the smoke cleared and the shooting stopped, the Culver City officers will call for backup and call for the EMTs, who would arrive shortly after. Now, 19-year-old Lil Boo Rock would sadly be pronounced dead at the scene, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. 20-year-old Baby Marco would be found on a lower level parking lot in the passenger seat of a white Cadillac, suffering from a gunshot wound to the head, and he also would be pronounced dead at the scene. Now, Baby Wack would suffer a gunshot wound to the head, but he would be still alive and would be transported to a nearby hospital. Now, 2 other men would also be rushed to the nearby hospital to be treated for their gunshot wounds. Now, both men would survive their injuries. Now, detectives would begin interviewing witnesses at the scene, but the witnesses would give conflicting stories. Now, officers would tell the media that it was possibly 4 different gangs that could have been involved in this situation, because at the time it was a war in the surrounding area. But the officers would be very quiet about who the particular gangs were. Now, nearly a week later, on August 4th, Baby Wack of the Rollin 60s would die of his gunshot wound to the head. Now, the victim's family believed that all 3 members of the Rollin 60s were shot and killed by the Culver City officers. But police would state that only one of the victims were killed by officer gunfire, and the other was killed by a rival gang member, and the 3rd victim would die by suicide. Now, both Baby Wack and Lil Boo Rock deaths were ruled a homicide by the coroner's report, but Baby Marco's death would be ruled a suicide according to the coroner, which I found very odd. Now, that's a very shocking report to find out due to the fact that all 3 members were just in a shootout. So for baby Marcos just to go down into the car and shoot himself and take his life, it just doesn't add up. So I'm not quite too sure what to make of it, but you guys let me know what you think about that. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.